Welcome back to Chapter 10, where we are discussing the basics of the nervous system. In video 1, we left off talking about the structure of a common neuron, or the structures that are most common to a neuron. So as a quick recap, we have the dendrites of your neurons. These are the processes, many processes that come that are attached to the cell body. The dendrites receive information from receptors. They receive information from other neurons. They receive information from other cells. They receive information from your external and your internal environment. It takes that information, sends it through those dendrites into the nerve cell body. Cell body is where you have all of your organelles, your Nissl bodies, your nucleus, your mitochondria, etc. It takes that information and then it processes it to send it to the next location. It does that by sending it through an axon. The axon is the extension from the cell body that is sending that information to the next location. It goes through the axon hillock into the axon itself. That those axons may branch off, but each branch will end at the axon terminal. And at the very end of it, you will have this synaptic knob or this terminal button. You'll see it named both throughout like your readings. So those are the main structures of the neuron itself. Then you have these yellow-looking structures. These cells are called Schwann cells. Schwann cells are the cells that wrap and insulate the axons of neurons that are located in the peripheral nervous system. It wraps them in order to create insulation. So just like the siding that's in the walls of your house, it's the same idea that this insulation is surrounding these axons of the neurons in the peripheral nervous system. And what happens by doing that is it helps the signals move faster. It helps the signals move more efficiently through the axon to the next cell. So you have Schwann cells that are wrapped around the axons they wrap their myelin around the axons in layers called myelin sheaths. Between each Schwann cell, you have this empty space called the node of Ranvier, and this is how the signal jumps from node to node in order to send the signal to the next cell. This image is showing you the same thing. It's just an up close and personal view of what the myelin sheath looks like wrapped around the axon of the peripheral nervous system neuron. And here you can actually see a micrograph, an image from a microscope slide. This would be one Schwann cell, this would be another Schwann cell, and this is the node of Ranvier in between. So now let's talk about myelinated and unmyelinated axons. Not all axons of the nervous system have that insulation of myelin. Not all axons have the insulation of myelin. So your myelinated axons are coated by your myelin sheath, just like we saw. It takes the myelin that makes up those cells and wraps it around the axons to create that insulation. In the peripheral nervous system, the cells that myelinate the axons are called Schwann cells, which is what we just looked at. In the central nervous system, those axons that are myelinated are done so by different cells, a different type of neuroglia. These cells are called oligodendrocytes. Oligodendrocytes. They do the same job as the Schwann cell. It's that the oligodendrocytes are in the central nervous system. Schwann cells are in the peripheral nervous system. Groups of myelinated axons in the central nervous system are what makes up white matter. So when you hear people talking about, or when you start discussing the gray matter versus the white matter of the brain and the central and the spinal cord, the white matter is made up of myelinated axons together. White matter looks white because of the fats and proteins located in or that makes up the myelin. Think about oil that has solidified. When oil is solidified, oftentimes it looks more white. When it is fluid, when it is warmer, when it is not solid, it looks more translucent, more clear. So if that helps, think about white matter as solidified fat and protein, and that's why it's white. The insulation increases the speed that the electrical impulses can have. So the more insulation, the faster those impulses can go from cell to cell. There are axons that are unmyelinated, that do not have the myelin sheath around them. So encased by Schwann cell cytoplasm in the PNS, but there's no wrapped coating of myelin surrounding the cells. So in the PNS, the unmyelinated axons are still wrapped with Schwann cells, but it's the cytoplasm of the Schwann cells, not of the myelin sheath. In the central nervous system, where you see groups of unmyelinated axons, it looks more like gray matter. So again, you have white matter and gray matter. White matter is white because of the fats and proteins that are around the axons. Gray matter is gray because these cells don't have those fats and proteins. So you're basically just seeing the color of the cells themselves. So in this image, you see a myelinated neuron and an unmyelinated neuron, or specifically the axon of the neuron. So this is the Schwann cell and the myelin sheath surrounding the axon. This would be the cell body or the cytoplasm of that Schwann cell, also surrounding that axon. And then here you see the cytoplasm of the Schwann cell, but you don't see any of those myelinated parts surrounding the axon. So axon, cell body, this is unmyelinated, axon, myelin, and then cell body with the cytoplasm. Let's talk multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is a disease process that is relatively popular or relatively common, not popular, common. Multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune condition where the body attacks and destroys the myelin sheath of the axons in the central nervous system. Remember, we said that the myelin sheath will insulate and protect the axons. Well, in the central nervous system, for some individuals, the immune system will attack it and destroy it. Specifically, the antibodies of your white blood cells see the myelin sheath as foreign, and so these antibodies will then attack and hold on to these myelin sheaths so that the cells can come and destroy the structure as though these myelin sheaths were foreign invaders. As the immune system destroys the myelin sheath, it scars the area. So your body will try to heal itself. Remember, a scar is basically your body's band-aid. So your body is trying to heal the destruction of the myelin sheath, and it creates scars. or sclerosis. Remember, sclerosis means scarring or hardening. So scleroses are left behind. And because it's now scarred, the neurons cannot conduct impulses. The impulses can't go from dendrites' cell body through the axon to the next cell because of the scars that are left behind impeding impulse conduction. Without the input from the motor neurons, muscles stop contracting and they atrophy. So, because the axons can no longer, of these cells, can no longer send signals to the next cell, those next cells stop receiving impulses. For muscles, those muscles stop receiving impulses to tell it to contract. If a muscle no longer contracts, remember the body is very efficient. It doesn't need to keep the same amount of bulk for muscles that are no longer using that bulk. So those muscles get smaller and atrophy. Other symptoms of multiple sclerosis, the person becomes fatigued. They cannot regulate their moods because remember, mood is controlled by your nerves. And your nerves are in your central nervous system. Well, you have nerves in your central nervous system, and these nerves are what no longer has the myelin sheath protection. You can have blurred vision, and you can also have weak and numb limbs, all because the myelin that is supposed to surround these axons is no longer there because it's being destroyed by your immune system. And because of that destruction, you're getting scarring, and that scarring is decreasing the is decreasing the signals that the nerves can send, and that is causing all of these symptoms. There are treatments to multiple sclerosis or for multiple sclerosis. Many of the treatments involve or suppress the immune system activity itself. So it doesn't necessarily go attack or do anything with the myelin itself or the nerves themselves. It actually suppresses the immune system activity so that the immune system is no longer attacking those cells. So now let's talk about different classifications of neurons. Remember I said that you basically have one neuron and many different neuroglia. Well, those neurons can look different, which means that they function slightly differently, even though that overall they are the same. So neurons are classified by how many processes are coming off of the cell body. You have multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar neurons. Multipolar neurons, this is the majority of your neurons. This is 99% of the neurons that are in your body. They have many processes, many poles that extend from the cell body. And what that looks like is lots and lots and lots of dendrites, one axon. Remember, most your neurons will only have one axon for the most part. So multipolar has many poles or many processes coming from the cell body, lots of dendrites, one axon. That's going to make up 99% of the neurons in your body. That is most of the neurons of the central nervous system and some of the neurons of the autonomic nervous system. Then you have bipolar neurons. Remember, bi means two, so that's two processes. So bipolar neurons have two processes coming from the cell body, one dendrite, one axon. Bipolar neurons are not very common. You'll find them in the eyes, the ears, and the nose, pretty much exclusively in those three places, the eyes, the ears, and the nose. Bipolar neuron. And then your unipolar neuron or pseudo-unipolar neuron, these are interchangeable. These only have one process that extends directly from the cell body. Now, that one process comes off the cell body, but then it branches off into two branches. The two branches of the unipolar neuron, one branch will function as an axon. So these cell bodies are mainly found in the ganglia of the peripheral nervous system. Ganglia of the peripheral nervous system. So what that looks like. Your multipolar neurons are the neurons that we typically see when we are looking at neurons. Anytime somebody draws a neuron, they're drawing a multipolar neuron. And remember, that means that you have many processes coming off of the cell body. There's going to be many multiple dendrites and one axon coming directly off of the cell body. Your bipolar neurons, you have two processes coming off of the cell body. So cell body, one dendrite with many processes coming off of it, one axon that may branch off into many branches at the terminal ends. Then you have your unipolar or pseudo-unipolar neuron. So cell body has one process that comes off. That one process branches into at least two different branches. Um, so one end acts as the dendritic end, receiving information, and the other end acts as the axon to send that information to some other part of the body. So that was the classification of neurons by structure. So multipolar, bipolar, unipolar, multipolar being most numerous, 99% of our neurons, bipolar, not as common, only existing in the eyes, the ears, and the nose. And then your unipolar or pseudo-unipolar neurons are found in the ganglia of the peripheral nervous system. Now, let's classify neurons by function. So remember, we talked about, excuse me, the three main functions of your neurons. You have your afferent neurons or your sensory neurons that receive information from the environment. You have your interneurons that process that information, and then the motor neuron that sends that information or the decision to move to effectors. So afferent or sensory neurons carry impulses from the periphery to the central nervous system. These are at the distal ends of your sensory afferent neurons. You have these sensory receptors. These receptors are detecting change. Remember, each receptor is detecting a specific type of change. It's not looking for everything. One sensory neuron is looking for changes in temperature. One is looking for changes in pressure, deep pressure. One is looking for light pressure. One is looking for pain, etc. So these are your sensory afferent neurons. Most of these are your unipolar neurons. Some of them are bipolar. And yes, you need to know the polarity of these different types. Your interneurons, also called association neurons, are internuncial neurons. These are the neurons that link other neurons within the central nervous system. Remember, inter means between. So these are the go-between neurons between your sensory and motor neurons. These relay information from one part of the central nervous system to another. This is your multipolar neurons. Some of the cell bodies cluster to form nuclei in the central nervous system. Now, when we say nuclei, we do not mean the exact same thing as we did before. So before, when we talked about a nucleus, when we talked about nuclei, we were talking about the organelle within the cell body that houses the chromosomes, the genetic material for that cell. In the central nervous system, we call the cluster of cell bodies a nucleus. So make sure that you know the difference between nuclei in the central nervous system versus the nuclei in the cell, located in the cell body. All right, so that when you see it, you won't get confused. And then the third classification is your motor neurons or your efferent neurons. These carry impulses from the central nervous system to your effectors. Remember, effectors are muscles or glands that move, that carry out information, that get a signal from your motor neurons to be told to do some function. These motor neurons are also multipolar. In your somatic nervous system, the control of your motor neurons are voluntary. So that goes to your skeletal muscles. Basically, you're telling your body, I want to move, I want to speak, I want to pick this up, I want to go to this place. So the motor neurons that go to your skeletal muscles in the somatic nervous system that goes to your skeletal muscles are voluntary. The ones that are part of your autonomic nervous system are involuntary. So these are the ones that are controlling your organs, your heart, your glands. So again, same image as the very first image that I showed you. Now we're just adding more information. You have your sensory receptor receiving information from the environment. It sends that information to a sensory neuron that takes that information to the central nervous system. The interneuron in that central nervous system will process that information. And then that information, if a decision is made that something needs to happen, it sends that information to a motor neuron, which takes that information to its effector, whether that is a muscle or gland, and tells it to do something. Same structure, just adding more information. All of this is peripheral nervous system. This is central nervous system. Let's stop there for now. I'll pick up with the classification of the neuroglia in the next video.